Hey everybody, welcome to Your Move. I'm Andy Stanley. You may have been taught that religion is some sort of solution, but when you look around, perhaps you wonder if maybe religion isn't actually the problem. If so, you are not alone. Stick around and we'll talk about it right here on Your Move. Who needs God? Who needs God? And do we really need God? For some people, the question isn't really, do we need God or who needs God? For a lot of people, the real question is, do we need religion? Who needs religion? And more Americans than ever are giving up on or backing away from religion. They disconnect from religion, they disconnect from God because they just don't need it. And it's not because they have found atheism so appealing, it's because they have found religion or the God of their childhood so unappealing. It's not because they've investigated the truths around or the teachings around atheism as much as they've just disconnected from something they just don't feel like they need anymore, that doesn't even seem real anymore. It's not an attraction to atheism, it's just that religion just doesn't hold the attraction that it used to hold. In fact, many would say that religion is actually the problem. Growing up, we were told that religion has the answers, that God has the answers, church has the answers. Now more and more people, especially in this country, are saying, no, the opposite's true. Not only does religion not offer us any answers, religion is actually part of or actually the problem. In fact, in a debate not too long ago, one of my friends was debating somebody I'm going to introduce you to in just a minute in the midst of this message, and my friend asked a compelling question. He said, well, then where does evil come from? What is the source of evil? And the person he was debating said, religion, and the entire audience erupted in applause. Immediately following 9/11, Sam Harris began to write a book that he would eventually publish under the title, The End of Faith. The subtitle of the book is Religion, Terror, and the Future of Reason. Religion, Terror, and the Future of Reason. And this is basically a scathing critique of all religions. And when he turned in the manuscript, the first publisher turned it down. Second publisher turned it down. In fact, he was turned down by over 12 publishers. Now, when you write a book and 12 publishers say, we don't want your book, that should tell you something. And the assumption among the publishers, and we can understand this, is there is no appetite in America for a book that criticizes Christianity. There's no appetite among Americans right now after what we've just experienced that's going to critique all religion. I mean, if you wrote a book that was critiquing Islam, maybe, but you're basically attacking all religions. So finally a publisher took the manuscript and published it. And his book stayed on the New York Times bestsellers list for 33 weeks. And it was effective because many Christians in this country came unglued when they read what he said. And so they began to email and they began to bombard him with letters and critiques. So he came out with another book entitled Letter to a Christian Nation. In this short book, he takes apart Christianity and basically says religion is part of the problem and Christianity in particular is part of the problem. The same year this book came out, Richard Dawkins published his famous book, The God Delusion. Here is an educated Oxford teacher, professor, super bright guy, and he doesn't simply write a book about atheism. He takes everything he believes as an atheist and he aims it at religion, the God Delusion. In the opening of his book, he says this. He says, if this book works as I intend, why'd you write this book, Richard? I'm about to tell you. If this book works as I intend, religious readers who open it will be atheists when they put it down. He sold over 3 million copies. It was published in 35 different languages. The following year, Christopher Hitchens, the British journalist, Christopher Hitchens published his book, God is Not Great. How religion, the subtitle, How Religion Poisons Everything. Now, immediately, these guys are like rock stars. They're on late night television. They're doing debates on campuses. They're doing speeches on campuses. Millions and millions of people are writing their book. And what turned out is that this group that are now called the New Atheists, this group gave voice to what a significant percentage of the population was already thinking. And that is, religion is, in fact, the problem. Now, the interesting thing was, after all of this literature, and some of you have never heard of these gentlemen, some of you have read their books, some of you have never heard of their books, but here's what happened in our country. While there was not a surge in atheism, in other words, while it's not like thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people suddenly overnight abandoned church, abandoned God, and check the atheist box, what did happen was there was an immediate migration from all religions and all religious activities in this country into a brand new category of people. That tens of thousands of people just disconnected from religion altogether. Not because they were embracing atheism, but they just realized, I just don't believe anymore, and perhaps religion is the problem. And as we look around the world today, it's understandable why people would begin to come to that conclusion. Not a particular religion, but religion in general. And this created a new category of people that you may have heard of, and you may not have heard of, that are known as the Nuns. The Nuns are essentially this new group of people, they're not new group, but has a new name for a group that's been around for a long time, of the unaffiliated or the non-affiliated, the non-affiliated. That is, we've not embraced anything, we've just disconnected from religious affiliation. We haven't joined the new religion. We're not necessarily atheists, we wouldn't even label ourselves as agnostic. We just know what we're not. We're not sure at this point what we are, but they're known as the Nuns. It's about 23% of the U.S. population. About 35% of millennials, primarily male, primarily educated, primarily left-leaning politically, theologically agnostic or theologically apathetic, don't know, don't care, don't feel like I even need to know. The Nuns are not hostile toward religion necessarily. They're just not affiliated with it. Now, here's the thing. I can't speak for all religions, obviously. I can't speak for all of Christianity, obviously. But here's what I'm absolutely convinced of. That the migration from Christianity and from the Christian church and from, the Christian church in this country in particular, the migration, and there has been an enormous migration away from the church in this country, that the migration away from Christianity in this country is the church's fault. It lies at the feet, the responsibility lays at the feet of people who do what I do and people who gather like we gather weekend after weekend after weekend. That the reason so many people have disengaged from the church, it's not because of the message, it's oftentimes because of the messenger, it's because of the vehicle, it's because of the media, it's because of the way things are talked about. But at the end of the day, it's not the nuns' fault that they found Christianity so unengaging and so unappealing and so unscientific and so irrational. It's my fault. It's our fault. People, and here's why I say that. Because when you open the Gospels, when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, when you look at the way that Jesus interacted with people, the person who's at the epicenter of everything we believe and everything we do as Christians, when you read the Gospels, you discover that people who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. And you discover that he liked them back. So perhaps if our Christianity isn't compelling, if our Christianity isn't attractive, if our Christianity doesn't have any stick, perhaps we have the wrong version. Now, the thing that convinces me that, in fact, I think we have the wrong version is all the deconversion stories that I've listened to and heard. And every time I hear one and somebody says, I've walked away from Christianity, I think in my heart, but wait. That's interesting, that's fascinating, that's heartbreaking, that's curious. But none of those are reasons to walk away from the faith. So, in this series, I want to address that. In this series, if I had the power, I would like to correct that. And I would like for all of those, for those of you who would consider yourself a nun, I would love for you to track with us throughout this series. I mean, I'll tell you my agenda. My agenda is to present perhaps Christianity to you in a way that has never been presented before, not because I have unique insight, not because I've stumbled across something that no one else has ever stumbled across, but because I think as Americans, we have embraced the wrong version. It's kind of the new American standard version of Christianity, and it is not appealing. And in some cases, as we'll discover, it's not even accurate. So So today, to begin our discussion, I want to go way outside to the furthest region of this discussion. And today's message is entitled Atheist 2.0. Atheist 2.0. Because I want to talk today about what it means to embrace atheism. And here's why. Not because so many people have stepped across that line and considered themselves atheists, but because so many people have stepped toward that line. And here's the thing, and you know this. You cannot move away from something without moving towards something else. You can't move away from something without moving towards something else. So for those of you who've said, you know what, I've lost faith in traditional religion. I've lost faith in the God of my childhood. I've lost faith in God as God has been presented. I've moved away from that. The truth is, without meaning to, without being intentional, you have stepped in this direction. And the other reason I want to talk about this is the new atheist, this group of men that I referred to before, and it's mostly men in this category, this new group of writers who've written so much recently and who are so popular in pop culture right now, this group of men, the new atheists, have updated us on what it means to be an atheist. They've updated atheism for the rest of us. And as you're going to discover, and as you need to know, especially if you've disengaged from Christianity or disengaged from religion, atheism is way more than simply disbelief in God. Atheism isn't just disbelief in God. Atheism is actually a complex belief system that logically leads to some unsettling conclusions. And you should know this. Not because the atheists are wrong. In fact, let me be clear. Today is not an argument against atheism, and today is not an argument for theism. Today is just a glimpse at what it means to embrace the tenets of atheism, because you should know. Because as you step away from, you step towards. And we all owe it to ourselves to know. And I'll be fair. Most people embrace Christianity before they know what they're getting into. And most people, I believe, embrace atheism or move toward atheism before they know what they're getting into. It cuts both ways. Atheism is a complex belief system that logically leads to some unsettling conclusions. But let me be fair in this way as well. Just because something is unsettling does not mean it's not true. Something can be unsettling and true at the same time. For example, your teenage daughter's boyfriend. It's true, that is her boyfriend, and then you met him, and that was unsettling. It was both unsettling and true, right? So every day in our lives, we bump up against things that are unsettling and true. But as we think about atheism, just as we'll talk about when it comes to Christianity, when it comes to atheism, it is a complex belief system. It's way, way more than I just don't believe in God. Because once you detach from believing in God or believing in a personal God, you, perhaps knowing, perhaps unknowing, begin to embrace a different world view. So today, I want to go over several things that you must embrace to be a good atheist. In other words, if you're going to be a consistent good atheist, here's some things that you must believe. Here's some things that you should consider. And I'll tell you up front, these first three, if you've disconnected from God or church, or you would say, yeah, I'm a nun, I'm a proud nun, I don't mind people knowing. The first three things may be things that you think, wait, I don't believe that. I don't think that's how the world works. That's not the way I think. But my point today is to present to you the alternative to theism. So let me be clear. Once God is out of the picture, once a personal God is out of the picture, once Creator God is out of the picture, this is what we're left with. And it may be true even though it's unsettling. But we should know what we have stepped towards. We should know what we're getting ourselves into. So, real quick, the first one is the illusion of mind. The illusion of mind. There is no such thing as mind if the universe is governed by the law of physics. Mind is an illusion. Here's what I mean by mind. If to be blunt, there is no you in there. There's just biology. Your biology, I'm biology, governed by the laws of physics, period. There is no you. You are chemistry and biology governed by physics. Now, the most stark illustration of this, interestingly enough to me, the one that really kind of made me stop and really think about what this would look like, actually came from Christopher Hitchens, the journalist that I mentioned a while ago. Christopher Hitchens died in 2011 from pneumonia that was related to the cancer that he had been battling for a long, long, long time. And so along the way, the doctors would say what doctors normally say. They would say, Christopher, your body is reacting, your body is responding, your body's trying to, your body's fighting, your body's giving into, and they would talk about his body, his body, his body. And in the book, he said, I eventually said to my doctors, I don't have a body. I am a body. Now, when I read this, I just had to stop and think, wow, there it is. That's it. If I'm just biology governed by the laws of physics, I don't exist. There's just body. That imaginary thing in my mind that's different from my brain doesn't exist. I don't have a body. There's no Andy. There's just biology that somebody labeled with 4 letters. It means that you're biology and I'm biology. So here's what, when I read this, I thought, what would it be like to live that way? So I tried. I was going to try for a whole day. I got about just a few hours. Then I thought, what would it look like to live as if there's no I and there's no you, that everything is only biology? And it was so difficult. I couldn't even think that way. I thought, okay, Sandra, my wife, is just biology, and my kids are just biology. Now, this may be true. There may be no you, there may be no I. We may just be biology that just kind of crowded in here or just tuned in. It may be true. But it is virtually impossible to live that way. And here's what I know about you. We've never met. You do not want to be treated like biology. You want to be respected as if there is a you in there somewhere. Now, that doesn't make it true. It's just one of the most uncomfortable byproducts of taking theism off the table, of taking God out of the equation. The second one is the illusion of will, the illusion of free will. In a world governed by physics, there is no room for free will. There is no room for decision making. That every decision you've ever made is an illusion. You have never actually decided anything. There is no way to explain, there's no way to factor in freedom in a world governed by the laws of physics. Stephen Hawking, you've heard of Stephen Hawking, a brilliant, super brilliant guy, written lots of books, famous because he has ALS. He is dying, but he is dying so slow, but his brain is just so brilliant, when he communicates through a device. And he, not too long ago, did an entire lecture on determinism. Somebody asked the question in the lecture, and he answered it this way. I forget the question, but the answer was, man is determined. Everything about man is determined, but it doesn't matter. Since it's determined, it doesn't matter because you can't do anything about it anyway. And the audience kind of nervously laughed. It's like, that's true. If it's all determined, then it almost doesn't matter that it's determined because I don't have any control. I don't have any choice in the matter anyway. But then he wrote this. This is so funny. Again, kind of poking fun at his own position. He writes, I have noticed that even people who claim that everything is predestined and that we can do nothing to change it look before they cross the road. Now, this is someone who believes in determinism. He says, you know what? There is no room for free will. There is no room for choice in a world governed by physics. But I have noticed we continue to live as if we have a choice. So once again, when you take God out of the picture, when you take theism off the table as an option, you're left with a world where choice is an illusion. And that may be true. I'm not arguing that it is or that it isn't. The other illusion, the third one, is the illusion of value. This is the most disturbing one to me personally. That in a world where there is no personal God or no creator, in a world that however it got here, that we're biology and chemistry governed by the laws of physics, there is no inherent or actual value. That all value, not just I'm not talking about monetary value, anything you value, relationships, people, your kids, your job, the whole idea of value is all an illusion. In other words, if I had a box and I said, hey, I've brought you some values, what would be in the box? Nothing. Value is something we leverage every day. In fact, we leverage it in every conversation. I'm leveraging it right now. We leverage the idea of value all the time, but value is not a thing. And in a world where freedom is impossible, value is impossible as well. We experience it, but it is an illusion, which means there is no inherent or actual value to anything. There is only ascribed or assigned value. There is no inherent, nobody is inherently valuable. We just ascribe value to that person. And if atheism is true, we have no choice over the value we ascribe to those people. Another way of saying it is this, that justice Just is just what we want it to be. Just is what we've been predetermined to decide that it is. So when we fight for justice or we stand for justice or fairness or equality or all those things that we talk about all the time, it is all an illusion. It doesn't actually exist. We are making it up. Now, the other things in the list of things you have to embrace if you're going to be a consistent atheist, if you decide, I don't want God in the equation, I don't want religion in the equation, I'm moving in this direction, are some things that you heard about growing up. And these are kind of the classic arguments for or against evolution or for or against atheism. The first one is that something came from nothing. Something came from nothing. Still in science today, this is a big mystery. That doesn't mean we won't solve the mystery. We're going to talk about that next week, actually. It doesn't mean this will never be solved, but currently there's no coherent hypothesis, there's certainly no coherent theory about where everything came from. We get as far back as the Big Bang, but there's not even language to talk about before the Big Bang because the word before assumes time. But when the Big Bang bang, time, space, and matter, and the laws that govern everything, the laws of physics, were all created in that moment, or all came to be in that moment. In fact, Richard Dawkins admits this. He famously says this. He says the cosmology, not cosmetology, pay attention, cosmology, because this isn't true of cosmetology, cosmology is waiting on its Darwin. We're still waiting on somebody to come along to give us a coherent explanation of why, and these are the big questions, why there is anything at all. The other thing that you have to embrace, and again, these are the kinds of things that we talked about in school or talked about growing up, is that first life emerged from no life with no help. That first life emerged from no life with no help. Now, for those of us who aren't scientists, which is most of us, for most of us who haven't thought about these things since, high school or maybe a lab that you had in college, most of us just don't live in this world. The whole idea of first life coming from no life, that problem is so far away that it seems probable that somehow, some way it worked out. Maybe it's possible. Richard Dawkins says we know it happened because here we are. So we know it happened. So, there's that argument. But for that to have happened, it is so extraordinarily complex. From lifeless matter, think about this, from lifeless matter to what Francis Collins refers to, I love this, he refers to it as the digital elegance of DNA. From lifeless matter to the digital elegance of DNA. The next one is that natural selection is responsible for all life after the first life. That natural selection, the process of natural selection, this is what Darwin gave us. The natural selection is responsible for all life. Didn't give us the first life, but after the first life. Now, the interesting thing about natural selection is, let me just read you something. When I finished the God Delusion, Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, at the end, he talks about natural selection, and he gives his own description of natural selection. And honestly, when I read what I'm about to read to you, when I read this, I almost felt like he was making fun of his own view. But as I've read his book and listened to him speak, I realized what he was doing. He was taking what's a very lifeless conversation, the whole idea that there is no God, that anybody that believes in God, it's a delusion. And he's trying to bring back some of the excitement and the energy and the awe and the wonder that all of us should have about the complexity of life. And so this was his attempt. So this is his explanation. This is straight out of his book, The God Delusion, toward the end. This is his description of natural selection. I just want to read it straight out of the book. This isn't something I've taken out of context. This is exactly what he says. Think about it. On one planet, and possibly only one planet in the entire universe, molecules that would normally make nothing more complicated than a chunk of rock, molecules that would normally make nothing more complicated than a chunk of rock, gather themselves together into chunks of rock-sized matter of such staggering complexity that they are capable of running, jumping, swimming, flying, seeing, hearing, capturing and eating other such animated chunks of complexity, capable in some cases of thinking and feeling and falling in love with yet other chunks of complex matter. He may be right, and he is a heck of a lot smarter than I am, okay? I have a degree in theology, okay? I am not qualified to talk about any of this stuff, okay? I just own that. I admit that. But when I read this, I thought, that is overwhelming. But my friends, that is where we are once God is taken out of the equation. And then he ends it with this statement. He says, we now understand, and he's talking about Charles Darwin and, the origins of the species and, his big discoveries that when he came out and sort of introduced evolution to the world, talks a lot about that. He says, now we understand, thanks to Darwin, now we understand essentially how the trick is done. And then he goes on to say, before Darwin, we had no idea how matter assembled itself into such complexity and reproduced to get us to where we are today. But thanks to natural selection, now we understand how the trick was done. Here, sort of just my personal observation as I've just immersed myself in all this over the past bunch of months. It is virtually impossible for me to think about natural selection without it starting to sound like an invisible personal force with an agenda. When I read these kinds of things and when I read what's written about natural selection, every time I read it, it feels more and more and more, not less and less and less. It feels more and more like an invisible personal force with an agenda. It's relentless. It's disciplined. It can't be stopped. It's like it's moving towards something constantly for millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of years until we finally get to where we are today. But if there is no God, I'm completely mistaken. That it is a process that I couldn't show to you any more than I can show you value or I can show you mind or I can show you compassion or anything else. It's a force that's behind everything that got us to where we are today. And there's tons of scientific evidence to the fact that that is the case, that it was natural selection that got us here. The question is, did it have any help? So let's be honest, okay? If you are losing or have lost faith in God, it is more personal than that. Atheism hasn't become more appealing. It's that religion has lost its appeal. Atheism hasn't become more appealing. Your version of theism has lost its appeal or no longer seems like it could be real. You have lost something. You have not intentionally stepped toward something else. You lost or you're losing your faith in God. And I'm going to do my best for these next few weeks. As arrogant as this may sound and as easily misunderstood as this may be. I want to do my best over the next few weeks to convince you that the God that you lost faith in probably never existed in the first place. That the version of God you lost faith in was the childhood God who never grew up. And that you walked away not because you're not smart and not because you're not sincere and not because you're not asking the right questions, but perhaps you walked away from Christianity anyway, needlessly. You had the wrong God. Now, my purpose today isn't to convince you of theism or to convince you against atheism. My purpose today is simply to shine a light on the alternative. Because if there is no God, this is what we're left with. And it may, I'm being honest, it may be true. There may be no will, only the illusion of will. There may be no value, no ought not, no justice, just the illusion. And there may be no mind. There may be no you. But we hope not. We hope not. See, we've never met, but here's what I know about you. We hope there is more. We hope we are more. But our only hope for that hope is God. So, who needs God? Perhaps we all do.